I knew the second his hand touched the phone cord that we were about to enter hell. Not metaphorical, not some overdramatic corporate hissy fit kind of hell, but real, infrastructural, server melting hell. Trevor, the newly imported operations manager with his gelled hair and PowerPoint charisma, sauntered up like a frat boy who'd just learned how to spell agile. He was making his rounds, glad-handing people like a politician at a bake sale, tossing out catchphrases like synergy and next-gen uplift like we all didn't want to hurl. When he got to my desk, the last one in the back, always by design, he gave that smirk that men like him think is charming but really just makes you want to check your wallet. "This thing still has a dial tone," he said, pointing to my desk phone. "You're a legacy expense, my friend." Laughter echoed. Champagne flutes clinked. Someone even threw in a half-hearted ooh like we were in a sitcom. Trevor grinned, proud of himself, and then he unplugged it. The room didn't shake. No lights flickered, no alarms sounded. But in my head, I heard it. The circuit flipping. The buried logic tree springing to life. The silent scream of a system that had been waiting 5 years for that exact moment. I smiled politely. I even raised my glass. "To modernization," I whispered. "Hey, before we go further, if you're listening and haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button. 97% of people never do, and it really helps the team. Throw in a like too, it's the fuel behind the madness. All right, back to it." See, Trevor thought he was being clever. What he didn't know was that my phone line wasn't just plugged in for show. It was a dead man switch, a failsafe, a last-ditch kill circuit hardwired into our disaster recovery architecture. Because 5 years ago, when we couldn't afford full cloud redundancy or real-time failover, I'd built something old school, something analog, something that wouldn't show up in a pretty dashboard or get flagged by a budget analyst. That phone? It was the heart of a hidden system. One call, placed or severed from that exact extension, and the protocol engaged, not instantly. That would have been too easy to trace. It waited, logged, validated the trigger phrase, "Yes, I'm serious." Legacy expense wasn't a joke to me. It was the phrase encoded into the event log. I wrote the documentation myself. Buried it under an archived compliance notes subfolder dated 2016, triple passworded. The passwords? A string of hex codes tied to internal system boot dates that only I could reconstruct. Trevor had no clue. None of them did. He kept moving, yapping about breaking patterns and shedding skin like a damn motivational poster. I stayed seated, watching the glass in my hand tilt ever so slightly with each tremor of my pulse. No one noticed. That was the point. I'd trained myself to be invisible in this place, competent, quiet, necessary, but unremarkable. They wanted people who made noise, who jumped on Slack threads with GIFs, and posted selfies from team offsites. That wasn't me. My work lived in root access logs and invisible guardrails. I didn't innovate. I protected. By the time the last toast finished, I was already packing up, said my polite goodbyes. No one really noticed I was gone. And by the time the new year hit, the timer had already started ticking. They just didn't know what they'd unplugged. They called it creative cost cutting when the budget for disaster recovery got slashed back in 2018. What they meant was, build us something bulletproof, but do it with duct tape and prayer. No redundant data lakes, no premium failover as a service vendors, no 24/7 DevOps team. Just me, a handful of outdated Blade servers, and the creeping understanding that if things ever went sideways, no one was coming to fix it but me. So I built the system the only way it could be built. Paranoid. Quiet. Analog. I called it the backbone, and no one knew it existed. On paper, our backup protocol looked standard. Nightly snapshots, tape storage rotation, some AWS Glacier for archival feel-good points. But underneath that, I rerouted a physical connection through an old desk phone line. Mine. That cord wasn't just carrying a dial tone. It was the first step in a relay chain. Sever it, and the signal passed into an analog trigger, stored on a private firmware chip I embedded in an unused access panel behind the server rack. No cloud logic, no remote override. Just an old-school failsafe wired into the bones of our infrastructure. The phrase, legacy expense, was hard-coded into the log as the verbal authentication phrase. It sounds ridiculous now, but you had to say it verbatim while the system registered the disconnect, or the trigger wouldn't deploy. Like I said, paranoid. Most engineers would have rolled their eyes, but I'd seen what a real crash looked like. A system doesn't die all at once. It gasps, it flails, and then it falls. If we were ever under attack, or if someone got clever and tried to modernize us with half-baked simplifications, I needed a way to pull the rug, isolate the core, and force revalidation. The only problem? That kind of design doesn't get you praise. It gets you labeled old-fashioned, stubborn. So I hid it. I buried the documentation inside an archived compliance folder labeled 2016 BCP Draft V4, knowing full well that no one had looked in that directory in years. The password to open the folder was a concatenated string of internal DNS salts, encrypted with a hash chain only someone who built it could reverse. In short, I built a fortress. Then I made the door invisible, and when Trevor showed up with his swagger and buzzwords, yanking cords like a toddler at a mixer, he didn't just pull out a phone. He activated a buried kill switch, one that didn't scream or flash warnings. It just waited. The first event log hit within minutes. Log type, interrupt, origin, extension, 1419 auth. Phrase, match, legacy expense. Response, protocol arm. Initiate poll. It was alive, and it would keep crawling forward, step by step, through its silent logic tree, testing fail-safes, checking for overrides, waiting for my key, because I'd built it to assume one truth above all. If they ever tried to erase me, the system had to make damn sure I was the only one who could put it back together again. I slipped out before the raffle. No coat check fuss, no hugs, no photos. Just a nod to the bartender, a final sip of sparkling cider, and the soft click of the stairwell door behind me. They were still laughing at Trevor's little legacy expense joke. Probably thought I was sulking. Or better, just too old to vibe. That's what he called it, I think. Old tech doesn't vibe with the new culture. Let them think that. Let them think whatever made them feel smarter, louder, faster. I had other plans. My flight left before sunrise the next day. 1 backpack, 2 emergency drives, 1 analog notebook, and a round-trip ticket with no return date set in stone. Destination? Jackson, Wyoming, where the air bites your lungs and the cell towers barely whisper. I'd booked a cabin. Solar power, wood stove, no internet. Not even the ranger station could reach you without a snowmobile. I left a single message on my out-of-office reply. Limited reception until further notice. For urgent system escalations, contact ops via internal bridge. They wouldn't know that bridge was quietly disabled. And even if someone caught it, they wouldn't dare fix it without me. See, the beauty of building everything yourself is you know exactly where to tug for things to quietly fray. And my little dead man circuit, it had a clause baked in. 72 hours. After that window, if I hadn't revalidated my credentials, the second phase would begin. Phase 2 was not gentle. I wasn't doing this out of revenge. I wasn't even angry. That would have required me to care what Trevor thought. But when a company spends half a decade treating you like a necessary evil and then replaces you with charisma in a blazer, you start thinking about continuity, about what happens when the last person who understands the foundation walks away. And I had. Carefully. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam a resignation letter on anyone's desk. That would have given them something to control, a narrative to spin. Instead, I did what legacy systems do best. I faded into the background. I spent New Year's Eve chopping wood and watching the stars roll overhead like data packets over an unbroken connection. There was peace in the silence. I knew, somewhere back home, the lights were still on, the monitors still humming. For now. The system wouldn't scream, it would tick. Quiet little flags, one by one. Failure to validate, protocol in wait, standby degraded, and by the time someone noticed those errors weren't just backlog noise. I'd be 3 miles into a snow-covered trail with no signal, no guilt, and no obligation to explain a damn thing. I wasn't gone. I was watching. I just wanted to see how long they could pretend I didn't matter, before the system I built reminded them that I did. 9:04 a.m., Monday. Most of the office was still dragging in, half caffeinated and full of post-holiday guilt, trying to remember what they were doing before the champagne and empty resolutions. A few folks in finance logged on early, probably to beat the queue backlog. That's when it started. The order queue hung. At first, just one stalled ticket, a batch execution timeout. No big deal, happens after a long break. But by 9:05, the trading server clocks were out of sync. That was the first real red flag. Sync failure meant trades weren't clearing. The ledger stalled. And when your system processes tens of thousands of micro orders per minute, a 2-minute gap is a bloodbath. By 9:06, multiple systems flagged critical warnings, failed writebacks, stalled heartbeat checks, timeouts on clustered dependencies. DevOps assumed a DNS hiccup or a holiday leftover script gone rogue. They tried failover routing. Nothing moved. By 9:07, the data pipeline jammed. Offsite storage triggers failed to engage, and the disaster recovery system kicked in just like it was supposed to. Only this time, it stopped. It didn't crash. It didn't throw smoke or sirens. It simply didn't authenticate. Console output flashed a cold black string. Error. 4Hi42, no secure path for protocol. T-switch legacy path A2. Translation: the path to reinitialize our critical backup network, the one I built when no one would budget for real infrastructure, had failed because it was waiting for something. Me. Someone in Tier 2. IT pulled up the protocol logs and started scrolling, then scrolling faster, then stopped. Who designed this fallback tree? Did we know there was a phase 2? Someone else asked. By 9:10, the boardroom's first emergency ping was fired. There was a Slack thread 30 replies deep before they even opened the audit chain. That's when my name came up. First as a question, then as an accusation, then as the only person who might know what the hell was going on. By 9:14, my old desk phone, still unplugged, still sitting like a tombstone in the corner of the server room, had its event log pulled manually. The entry was there. Extension 1419 disconnected. Verbal trigger matched. Countdown initiated. Someone whispered it out loud, like reading a ghost story in church. Wait, that phrase? Trevor, bless his fragile ego, apparently tried to deny it at first, called it a coincidence, said I was probably running some outdated watchdog script. But the logs didn't care about ego. And they sure as hell didn't care about Trevor. Every 5 minutes, a new warning surfaced. Failover stalled. No authenticated path found. Manual override, not registered. Someone pinged compliance. Legal joined the emergency bridge. The CFO asked, "Is this ransomware?" And someone, probably shaking, replied, "No, it's internal. Someone did this on purpose." Which wasn't true exactly. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd just built a system that didn't trust anyone unless I told it to. And Trevor? He'd unplugged the only person who could. The call came through the emergency cascade, an encrypted line only the board had access to, meant for data breaches or black swan events, not for the fallout of holiday party buffoonery. I was halfway through splitting firewood outside the cabin when the alert chirped once, low and specific, the tone only I would recognize. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Is this—" The voice caught. She regrouped. "This is Cynthia Lane, board oversight." I stayed quiet. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is," she said. Her tone wasn't panicked. It was worse. Controlled dread. The kind of fear that knows exactly what's coming but hopes. By some miracle, it isn't. I gave her nothing but a question. Did Trevor document the bypass procedures when he restructured the access logs? There was a pause long enough to measure a career in. "No," she finally said, voice lower. "He said your systems were legacy-bound and flagged them for phase-out. The logs were optimized." Optimized. I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you let out when you realize you're not coming back to clean up someone else's mess. You're coming back to decide how much of it you're willing to fix. "I'll need an executive directive for re-entry," I said. "In writing. Chain of custody protocol must be clean. Any attempt to shortcut it and the system will stay cold. That's not a threat. It's a fact." She didn't argue. I could hear the rustle of papers, someone, somewhere, already preparing the documents. Before she could ask anything else, I added, "And no shortcuts, Cynthia. If this is to be fixed, it gets fixed properly. not patched. Not panic-hammered by Trevor's LinkedIn consultants. Then I hung up. No drama, no screaming, no demands. They'd made it procedural when they pushed me out quietly, when they let Trevor overwrite critical infrastructure without so much as a peer review. So now I'd play the game they liked best. Documentation. I had conditions, not out of revenge, out of principle, out of the understanding that people like Trevor got promoted on the backs of silent engineers like me, until the system they stood on started to rot beneath their feet. And when the cracks finally showed, they didn't ask who built the foundation. They asked who could fix it. That's leverage, not emotion, and I was going to use every line of it. January 5th, 11:22 a.m. The badge reader beeped green. It hadn't done that for me in weeks. I stepped through the security gate like I'd never left. No fanfare, no welcome committee, just the antiseptic hum of fluorescent lighting and the faint smell of microwave soup from an overstressed break room. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not a calm kind, but the brittle quiet of panic held together by caffeine and denial. The entire West Wing had been converted into a makeshift war room. Screens lit up every wall. Error logs, cascading timestamps, red blocks of failed syncs stacked like tombstones. Empty Red Bull cans and half-eaten Kind bars littered every surface. Someone had dragged in 2 air mattresses. There were at least 4 engineers asleep in chairs, still wearing the same clothes from Monday. I walked past them. No one said anything at first. A few lifted their heads, squinting, unsure if I was real. Then someone nudged Trevor. He looked like a man who'd aged a decade in 3 days. Red-eyed, lips cracked, tie missing. He was hunched over a dry erase board that looked like the ravings of a fever dream, arrows pointing to nowhere, acronyms misused, entire systems boxed and labeled "to fix" in aggressive caps. He stood. You can't just... I held up a single finger. Not to silence him, but to make it clear I wasn't interested in noise. I wasn't back for theatrics. I was here to do what needed doing. The terminal at my old desk still booted clean. No one had dared to shut it down. I sat, logged in, and typed 2 commands. Init restore. Cache bot A2 daokor pull auth bot rebuild key 1419 night master hex. The screen blinked, then again. And then the pipeline flickered to life. Servers began syncing. Queues started clearing. Logs stabilized. The cascade paused, hesitated, and then locked into rhythm. It was like watching a coma patient blink for the first time. The hum changed. You could hear it, the sound of order returning. Total time from my key to full stabilization, 18 minutes. No one clapped. No one even exhaled. They just stared. Not at the screens. At me. Trevor opened his mouth again, probably to ask how. Maybe to apologize. Maybe to spin it. I stood before he could speak. Systems restored, full cache integrity, no corruption. I looked at him once. Don't touch it again. Then I walked out. Let them sit with it. Let them absorb the truth. That all their brainstorming sessions, their crisis stand-ups, their frantic Slack channels had done nothing. And that the woman they labeled Legacy had fixed it in less time than it took Trevor to spell redundancy. I wasn't interested in proving anything. I'd already done that. Silently. Precisely, irrefutably. The email went out at 6:04 a.m., the morning after restoration. No subject line theatrics, no emotional preamble. Just the kind of surgical language that makes legal departments sit up straight and compliance teams cancel meetings. Attached were 14 pages of audit logs, all time-stamped, all cross-referenced against internal system activity. I highlighted the exact moment Trevor bypassed 2 protocol verification layers. His digital signature, the command strings he used, even the typo he made when trying to rename the backup keychain. He'd labeled it Modernize Path, then forgot to lock the override script. Sloppy. I let the logs speak for themselves. Page 7, line 442, modification request. Access outs legacy root disable failover auth, true user, T Carson, admin, ID, rzone 8276. Timestamp, 12/22/1413. Comment, clearing dead weight logic before refresh. That line alone would have sunk him, but I didn't stop there. I embedded screenshots of the failed logins, the blocked handshakes, the escalating error stack. One diagram showed the difference between my original Cascade structure and Trevor's refactored version. His edits looked like someone had tried to rewire a power grid with a butter knife. No color, no emotion, just raw, annotated proof. At the end of the report, I attached a single-page addendum, Charter Clause 7.3b. It hadn't been invoked in 5 years. Security custodianship. Rollback in event of systemic compromise. In the event of a confirmed breach, infrastructural failure, or verified negligence by successor administrators, original architects retain authority over system restoration, reauthentication, and temporary governance until full operational stability is achieved. I had co-authored the infrastructure charter back in 2017. Only a handful of us even remembered it existed. And buried near the bottom of that clause, custodian of record, E-Row systems architect, ID Wartain, me. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to call out names. The memo didn't accuse, it documented. But it ended with one unmistakable conclusion. Trevor hadn't just failed to modernize the system, he had actively compromised it. And by protocol, authority returned to me. No debate, no ego, no meetings to circle back, just the rules, the ones they'd forgotten, the ones I hadn't. The boardroom was colder than usual that morning, figuratively and literally. Some intern had messed with the HVAC scheduling script during the outage, and no one had dared to fix it yet. So we sat there in a forced chill, jackets still on, the air sharp with the scent of cheap coffee and career fear. 12 board members, 1 legal observer, a compliance lead with 3 binders, and a face that said she hadn't slept in 40 hours. And Trevor. He was seated 2 chairs down from me, trying to look composed, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. His tie was tighter than usual, maybe in the hope it would hold him together. He had his laptop open, some half-baked incident timeline on screen, already cued to defend himself. But it wouldn't matter. I was asked to present first. I stood, plugged in my drive, and said only what was needed. I walked them through the root failure. Trevor's unauthorized override of legacy protocols, his disabled failover authentication layer, the blocked cache revalidation trigger. I showed them the exact audit trail that aligned with his modernization sprint. Every log, every bypass, every silent error that accumulated into 3 days of chaos. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't embellish. No grandstanding, just the brutal sequence of facts. Trevor started to speak halfway through, some nonsense about intentions and team trust. But the chairman didn't even look at him, just raised 1 palm in the air and said, "He's speaking. You're observing." It landed like a gavel. I clicked to my final slide. White background, black letters. Legacy doesn't mean obsolete, it means irreplaceable. Until you try. Silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind where people realize they've been played by their own assumptions. The vote that followed wasn't loud. Just a series of nods, the quiet scratching of pens, the unmistakable sound of consensus. Trevor's title was amended on the spot. No dramatic firing, no security escort, just a delicate reclassification to transition consultant effective immediately. He would remain to document his own mess, and then exit. No one applauded. It wasn't that kind of victory. The board thanked me. Asked if I'd be willing to lead an internal review of infrastructure roles and resourcing. I said yes, on one condition, that the custodianship clause remain active for 90 days. They agreed. Trevor stared down at his screen like it might save him. It didn't. He never looked at me as I gathered my things. He didn't need to. He already knew. This wasn't personal. It was protocol. It was almost poetic, the way it showed up. Quiet, unannounced, slipped into the company's Slack like any other link. No fanfare, no directive to engage with leadership's thought piece. Just a quiet ping in the Harzan Industry Insights channel. Trevor Carson. Modernizing Legacy Systems. Lessons in Overhaul. The title alone reeked of corporate penance. I clicked. I wasn't sure why, curiosity maybe, or that strange compulsion to watch a person try to rewrite a fire as a learning opportunity. The blog was cleanly written, generic in tone, and scrubbed of any specific failures. No names, no systems, just vague nods to unexpected complexity, transitional friction, and respecting inherited architecture. It danced around the truth like a man trying to avoid a landmine he'd already stepped on. There were no lies, but there weren't any truths either. It was the kind of piece you publish when you've been told to make peace without admitting guilt. I scrolled past the paragraphs of tech platitudes and jargon-drenched reflection until I reached the bottom, just above the footer, right where the comments lived. There was only one. No username, no title. Just a single sentence, sitting there like it had been waiting the whole time. Respect is part of the infrastructure. Remove it and everything collapses. Nothing else. But it didn't need anything else. Because everyone who read it, everyone who had stayed up during those nights, who had watched Trevor melt behind that whiteboard, who had seen me walk in and put the system back together in silence, knew exactly who wrote it. And more importantly, they knew why. The servers were stable again. Uptime held. But something had shifted inside that company. A quiet reordering. A recalibration of what was actually valuable. Who was actually essential. They didn't speak it out loud, but they felt it. Because legacy isn't what you discard. It's what holds everything else in place. He thought he was unplugging an old phone. He was cutting the wire to our survival.